Hello, everybody. I am delighted to be here hanging out with you all in Tammy will tell us how many years it's been in a minute, but in the fifth year we're wrapping up the fifth year of this webinar series. We're just so delighted that you could find some time. And also we send long distance love to folks who will watch this recording after the fact. Our series is called Engaging All Learners in the Middle Years, and this year we focused on multi-age classrooms, really celebrating the opportunities of working with children across more than 1 year, and the opportunities to mentor and engage with them and really support them, not just over 1 year, but over more than 1 year. And so we've had a wonderful group of sessions. The first one with Brittany, Linda, and Joanne really looked at, like, at the beginning of the year, thinking about connecting to place and land, an inquiry in units that really connected belonging to place and community. In our second session, we had Shelley Moore, Belinda Chi, Brian Gudinski, Marna McMillan, and Kieran Abraham. And we really looked at diversity in terms of our design, as well as critical literacy. And then last session, Angela Stott, who's hanging out on the screen, thanks, Angela, for coming back, and Jennifer Eddy and Rebecca Lebenville really took us on literally a journey, as Angela used a metaphor of travel, and we had a chance to look at practices that really centered assessment as a relational practice. And today, we're just thrilled to have Nikki Lineham and Kendra Jacobs, two colleagues of ours that Tammy and I have worked with for some time, as we really dig into multi-age numeracy classrooms in the middle years. So welcome, everyone. And as Kelvin was mentioning, this project is a partnership between the University of British Columbia's Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center, the Rural Education Advisory, and the Ministry of Education. And we are so grateful for the financial support of the Ministry of Education in recognizing the uniqueness of our middle years learners. I am joining you from Stolo territory today, everybody. As I'm traveling my way through, I'm joining you from Imagine High. But UBC is hosted on Musqueam territory. And so I am so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with Quam, Dr. Joanne Archibald, and really thinking about how the work we can do can be decolonizing work when we center the perspectives of all of our learners, and really disrupt this idea that we all should be doing the same thing at the same time in the same way, but rather that all children bring knowledge and strengths and expertise, that if we draw that into our teaching and build from there, we're engaging in responsive, diversity positive practice. And so I'm so grateful to the Musqueam elders who have worked with us at UBC to help us explore this concept and really move away from kind of decontextualized practice to community-based practice, which includes working with the land and our local nations. Tammy's going to talk a little bit about why we're doing this.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Renyard. I'm a district principal. I am learning Hulkaminam. I'm zooming from the traditional territories of the Cowichan people, specifically on the territory right now of Quamitsan. This kind of idea or dream grew 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I had the opportunity to be at the ministry, and it reminded me that for many years in our province, we had initiatives that really networked all across the province, connecting voices. And we had the opportunity, Heather Brown and I, to do a little bit of that work when we were at the ministry that year. And when I went back to Victoria District, we thought, not everyone has access to those conversations. Some folks in rural may not have as much professional learning dollars so that they could access different speakers and opportunities. And I was learning from Leyton through the rural education community, the amazing innovative ideas that were being seeded in communities. And it's like, how do we bring that to some of the other places that maybe don't have that opportunity or need to be more creative? And so this work really launched as a way for us to provide equitable access to high quality conversations about teaching and learning, so that everyone had the opportunity to be connected to work that matters, and matters being making a difference for the students that we serve across the province. And over the years, we've had well beyond our province engage in this work. We've had people coming in from all over the land to join us in these conversations. So we're really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for the core group that comes alongside and offers to pick up a piece and present and share their practice and be vulnerable, because sometimes this platform can be scary when you're trying to present and you don't know. Leyton sometimes struggles. He can't tell if people thinks he's funny on these platforms because we're all muted. But just this deep appreciation for the work that's happening across our province and the gifts that folks give in the communities they are in, and sharing the work so that we can be better together. When Twitter was a thing, we had the hashtag Better Together as a way that I put out the work, because I do really believe that sometimes when we're alone, it can feel daunting to stay committed and engaged to work that is challenging and rewarding. And so for me, this is the opportunity for us to celebrate the diversity and beauty in our province through children and educators. So I'm deeply grateful to Leyton for being a champion of this work and being alongside us for 5 years. I hope we're back next year in year 6, but that will to be determined, I guess, Leyton. So thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back to Leyton.
Thanks, Tammy. So folks, we've been anchoring our work in middle years philosophy and practice. And so I won't go into these in depth, but just a reminder each time that we're really thinking about who is this age group and what their capacity is, and that they're able to participate in active and personal learning and don't need to fill out a worksheet. They need a chance to like ask questions or wonder. And really part of that practice is valuing the diversity of our kids, as I said at the beginning, that we value what they bring and we build from where they are, and we really want them to share their perspectives and their backgrounds and their ideas with us, not to shut down to do the thing that we're doing, but instead bring what they bring to the learning that we all engage in together. We are trying to offer kids ways to show what they know in different ways and to engage in ideas in more than one way over the course of a week, and really push our learning to be integrative, cross-curricular, exploratory, so that it feels meaningful. So it's not like today I have to do this. It's like, this is where we're at today. How can we explore it and make sense of it together? What are your questions? What are your ideas? How does this relate to our lives and what we're doing? And big questions. We're always looking at our learners to say, what can they do? What's a stretch for them? And what's our next step? And so our assessment in the middle years is really about getting to know our kids, seeing what they're doing, and building from where they are. Not thinking from a deficit perspective, but from a potential perspective. Where could we go next with these groups? Because in the end, the middle years are foundationally about development and developing our identities. And so if we create positive spaces where we're affirming kids and helping them grow and helping them set goals and helping them see their strengths and their gains and set goals, then we're supporting them to develop healthy identities in holistic ways. And that's so central to positive learning and development that doesn't just last through the middle years, but builds dendrites and pathways through neurons for the rest of their lives. And so here we are together, collaborating, sharing our practice. And I'm super excited to introduce my friend, my colleague, Kendra Jacobs. Kendra and I have known each other, I think, for about a decade now, Kendra. And so Kendra works in School District 23. She's currently a learning resource teacher in an elementary school. She's been a district numeracy helping teacher in the school district. And we taught together at, when I was there at UBC Okanagan, and Kendra teaches the numeracy courses there. And we're excited about her work. And so I talked her into this when we were all sheltering in place, not from COVID, but from the fires last summer. And so we were out at her parents' place in Christina Lake because we couldn't all get back home. And I said, Kendra, are you interested in this? And she said, maybe. Well, maybe turned into a yes. And so Kendra, thanks for coming to share your practice with us today.
Okay. Thanks, Leyton, for that introduction. Yes, that was a time of shelter indeed, but some exciting things came out of it. So I think there we go. Okay. And so, yeah, thanks for that introduction. I am very excited to be here today, a little bit nervous. And I think the word that I hear Leyton often use about that is nervous-sighted. So, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share. I am joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Okanagan Syilx people, and it is an absolutely beautiful day here. This morning, I started my day with a walk outside and just really noticing the new spring growth. It really overnight seemed to just sort of exponentially become green. And it was just such a beautiful sight. And of course, the sun was shining today too. So we were very fortunate with that. And so today I'm going to share my journey in using math workshop in multi-grade classrooms. And so really the journey has taken place over a number of years, and I look forward to sharing to you where I'm at this point in the journey. It's ever evolving and I'm always learning new things. And if math workshop is a new term for you, don't worry about it, because we're going to really dive in deep into what it is and what it means and how it can create a space for all learners to thrive. The ideas that I'm sharing are shared in more detail on my blog, and I also do post in examples on Instagram. So if you're interested in looking more into some of the things I'm sharing, you can find that there. And so for our learning journey today, I'm going to talk about the components of thriving mathematical communities and how we can uphold those. Then we're going to dig really deep into the components of math workshop, and we'll explore some ways to balance competencies and content, which kind of cycle back to creating those thriving mathematical communities. And then we'll wrap up with looking at an example in action. So the math workshop structure is really rooted in the work of Kathy Fosno. And one thing that I love about her work is she talks about the idea of math as being active and a verb. So math itself is not a verb, but she talks about mathematizing and the doing of math. And she really refers to that as the activity of structuring, modeling, and interpreting our lived world mathematically. And so we're going to carry that idea of math as a verb, the doing component of mathematizing, with us as we explore what it means to do that math in the workshop structure. Thinking about a workshop structure, the foundational component of that structure is a thriving mathematical community. And so when we unpack the components of a mathematical community, we want to pay extra close attention to the children's identity as learners, as mathematicians, as holistic beings. We want to really unpack their mindset, their growth mindset, as well as their perseverance through things, their communication, both orally as well as representation of their thinking in terms of communication, and their collaboration. And so throughout my story, you'll see lots of different examples there and different ways that teachers have explored these ideas to help bring it to life, and how this is actually sort of working with the children in our care. So math workshop is rooted into inquiry-based practices, and often during math workshop, the children are investigating one shared rich task. And so while this shared rich task and inquiry is happening, that doing of mathematics, the students are entering the tasks with the knowledge that they bring with them. They're thinking about their own funds of knowledge, and they're entering at a point that makes sense for them. They're solving the problems using different strategies, and they're really developing their own deep understandings of the content and competencies around our shared rich task. The teacher during this time is really mentoring those mathematicians, nudging that learning forward, thinking about where the students are at as individuals as well as a community, and moving that learning forward. The teacher is really listening and responding to the children and working as a facilitator of that content and the competencies. And so when we break math workshop down, we can see in the top left there an example of a teacher who's actually broken it down and co-constructed the nature of that math block with the children and each of the different parts. And the teacher that worked to do that really noted that the children really appreciated understanding the different parts and having a say in what the different parts were, why they were important, and how they helped them learn. And so those three main parts of the math workshop are the mini lessons. And the mini lessons happen through whole group instruction. When we think about the mini lessons, I often like to think about, is my mini lesson focusing on developing a content focus or a competency focus? And the purpose of both of those is to really get underneath the thinking of the children. What are they thinking about? Why are they thinking that way? And build that class community culture. So the mini lessons might take the form of a problem string, a number sense routine. They might be some form of thin slice. And they're also an opportunity for us to really engage in that formative assessment of noticing where our children are at, what can they do, and what might their next steps be. We then transition into an investigation. And an investigation is where that rich task happens. It happens as the whole group investigates either one shared rich task, or perhaps they're working in some games to really engage in that purposeful practice. And during this time, the children are really putting those competencies into life. They're communicating with one another. They are working through challenging problems that might be pushing their mindsets and helping them develop that perseverance. They're bringing what they know and developing their identity. And they're really thinking about that representation of how they are communicating both orally and representing their thinking. It's also an opportunity for educators to engage in formative assessment and think about the individual students that might need a little bit of extra support and what they might need that support in. And because everyone is deeply engaged in the work, it allows us to sit side by side with those learners and really think about what they know, where they're at, and how we can move them forward. The last component of a math workshop is the sharing component. And the most important piece of that sharing component is that we're building a purposeful audience of mathematicians. We are really helping the children see themselves and their peers as mathematicians with valuable ideas to bring forward to the group, to share with the group and one another. And so a sharing time might take the form of a math meeting, it might take the form of a gallery walk, or perhaps just a partner share where two groups are sharing with each other. So you might end up with 4 children sharing with one another in sort of smaller groups. When we do think about a math meeting, we can see the photo up on the left there, on the right there, and that's children engaged in a math meeting where the children are really facilitating and sharing about their learning. And we want to really intentionally select the mathematicians that are sharing during that time to highlight the different strengths that they all bring and the different ways of solving problems. And we can do that by thinking about anchoring our sharing into some math goals of being organized and efficient. And those ideas tend to go across all math learning, and it helps the children really think about, what am I sharing and why am I sharing it? Am I sharing my thinking in an organized and efficient way for my audience of mathematicians to make sense of? And then during that sharing time, we are really building the collective knowledge of our community of mathematicians. And so in a nice, perfect dream world, if we had an hour of math, our math workshop, we might hope that it looks something like this. We start with a mini lesson. We spend most of our time actively learning, really bringing that learning forward, and we wrap up with a nice sharing time. And in reality, doesn't always go like that. And we can really tailor our math workshop to the responsive needs of our classroom. And so I'm not going to go over all of these examples because I will explore them more in depth when I go over what this can look like in action. But thinking about, if the children are really engaged in an investigation, it might be okay to let them linger in that investigation for longer and perhaps begin the next day with a sharing time, or perhaps you don't need to do the sharing time in that particular moment. And you can think about reordering those components, changing the length of them in response to what the children are thinking and doing, and what makes the most sense for your community of learners at that moment in time. And so when we think about facilitating a successful math workshop, we want to really unpack the balance of competencies and content. Some questions that I've worked to ask myself when putting this all together is, what is my main content goal? And ensuring that there are opportunities for entry points for all children to access that content. Recognizing that perhaps it doesn't mean that they are all solving the problem in entirety, but they're really thinking about the context of the problem and the numbers within the problem, and thinking about that sense-making process. So recognizing that we don't all need to solve the problem, but we all need access to engage with the problem and sense make around the inquiry that we are sharing. Then I like to look at what competencies might be getting in the way of the content learning. So perhaps the children, I've worked in classroom cultures before where the children tend to get stuck quite easily. They need extra nudges in beginning the learning and developing that mindset for learning. And so we might explore what can you do when you get stuck? What does it mean to persevere through something that's challenging? Or you might be working in a community of learners where the collaboration is tricky. And so we might explore how we work together with one another and what that looks like and what it sounds like and what it can feel like. And if we do have a disagreement, how might we approach that? And then the last thing I like to really consider is, now that I've identified my main content goal and the competencies that might be getting in the way of the content learning, how can I seek input from the community about that competency? The children have such rich funds of knowledge, and we want to really honor those and bring them forward when we are exploring how we can support the community in developing that competency. And so here are some examples of what that might look like in action. And so you can see on the far right there, we've really unpacked what math partners do together. We can see phrases like agree to disagree. They talk about the math. That was coming up a lot. And so the teacher has recorded these ideas, but they've really come from the ideas of the children. And they've co-created an anchor chart that now lives as an artifact in their class to refer back to. We can also see in the middle where we've unpacked the idea of what mathematicians do. We've really worked to develop that identity as mathematicians. And so we can think as mathematicians do and really engage in that work together. And so we've recorded, actually, I've taken the names off, but you can see little bits of letters that represent where the names are. And so we've really honored the voices of the children. And we've actually come back to that multiple times throughout the year, because we know that through repeated experiences, the children deepen their understanding of what mathematicians can do over time. And so then they can really dig deeper into what their role is as a mathematician and how that might come to life. We can also see some other examples here where we dove really deep into what happens when you disagree with a partner and how the children's voices are honored and what the approaches they might take, or perhaps how mathematicians feel. Unfortunately, the hand is covering it, but it really gave us a window into the children's thoughts and feelings about math. And one of them wrote, they feel bamboozled. So really honoring the voices of the children and thinking about how they are contributing to developing those competencies in our classrooms. And again, Kathy Fosno reminds us of such rich thinking, and she lets us know that learners in our care must be led to trust that their ideas count, that their peers and the teacher really care about their thinking, that they will be given time to explore different strategies and pursue their inquiries, that their questions and insights matter. When we think about that holistic nature of the math workshop and balancing the content and the competencies, we can really root into this quote from Kathy Fosno around the time that children need to develop this and the responsivity of that structure. And so we can really stretch the structure to match the time that the children need to bring their inquiries and their questions and their insights to life. So we are going to look at what this might look like in action. And so what this story, I'll go through the phases of a math workshop from about the first 3 days. And this comes from a multi-grade classroom, and we were really noticing that the children were needing some extra practice with division. And they were really feeling quite overwhelmed about the division. And so we took a approach where we investigated a context that I will share with you as we go. So we started our mini lesson really reviewing the competency that we noticed was coming up a lot in our community. And so the inspiration from our anchor chart came from the Hands Down Speak Out book, but we really turned that lesson around and asked the children, what's important in a turn and talk? And how do we need to engage as community members in a turn and talk? And so they identified that you needed to face your partner. It was really important to stay on topic. And they also identified that it was really important to actually remember what your partner was saying. So really thinking deeply about it. So as we were building this context, we asked the children, what do you know about vending machines, to give them a little warm up to practice their turn and talk in action. And then we have adapted these investigations from the Context for Learning resource that we use throughout the next few slides. So after we asked them what they knew about vending machines, we had lots of very interesting answers. Some of them weren't familiar with vending machines, which was kind of surprising to us. Many of them had experienced vending machines and out and about in the community. And so we told the story of how we were at a vending machine at the rec center the night before, and we had noticed that there was a worker and he was working to fill the vending machine and top it up. And so we got a little bit curious, and we asked the man who was filling the vending machine how many bottles fit inside the machine. And so he told us 156 bottles fit inside the machine. And as he was filling it up, he had all his packs of water and he was unpacking them and loading them into that machine one by one. And so we got wondering, well, how many packs of water will fit in this machine? And beside the water machine was space for juice vending machine. And so in that juice vending machine, there was also 156. And on his trolley, on the bottom of his trolley, he had the 6 different flavors of juice that were all neatly lined up in the rows in his vending machine. And so we were wondering how many of each flavor can fit in the machine. Now, the context for this problem was selected quite intentionally, and they're juxtaposed with one another so that the answer is the same, but it's different kinds of division, so that we could really unpack with the children what are their strengths within division and how are they approaching the problem. And so we can see that they have approached it in many, many different ways. Some of them have used a ratio table. Some of them have used repeated addition, adding up towards 156, and lots of different representations there during our investigation that emerged. Following our mini lesson of our turn and talk, our investigation, we engaged in a gallery walk and feedback. And so the children placed their thinking around the room, and we looked at their thinking and offered each of the children sticky notes to give some feedback to each other in their thinking. And so we can see lots of interesting ideas like, you did a lot of math, or I agree, this is smart, I love it, whoa. So lots of positive feedback. They are definitely engaging with their peers in seeing each other as the audience for their math thinking. After a reflection on this day, so this all happened in one day. After the reflection here, we really thought, how can we go deeper with that feedback? That was our big wonder. The children were really seeing each other as an audience for the math, but we weren't convinced that they were really digging deep into that role of offering helpful feedback. They offered really positive feedback, but it wasn't necessarily super helpful to move the learning of the community forward. So bring us to day 2. We started the day, and here you can see that adjustment of the workshop structure. So we started the day with a mini lesson. We engaged in a problem string where we wanted to strengthen our understanding of multiplication to help us with our division question. We had a new investigation question about a vending machine, this time that only fit 132 bottles. And how many 6-packs would fit in that vending machine. And we can see that some of the children, it's not quite as clear here, but this particular partnership actually really grew in their thinking from the gallery walk the day before. They borrowed some ideas from the community and tried them out in terms of adding up to try to get all the way to 132. And so that's a strategy they were using to make sense of the context. And then we did another mini lesson where we asked the children to think about what cloudy thinking might look like or clear thinking. And if they are hearing or noticing cloudy thinking, what could they do? And so they came up with a few phrases that they could share. And if they noticed clear thinking or they heard clear thinking, what could they do? And so moving on to our gallery walk and feedback from day 2, we can really see that growth in and depth of their compliments. And so I've taken some sticky note feedback from the same children, and you can see that child B said, "I like your thinking, amazing work on day 1. And day 2, she has really grown to say, "I like how you did 10 6-packs and how you did 2 more 6-packs. And so she's put her little sunshine there, and we can really see the depth. She's really thinking deeply about the mathematics and the way that the children had solved their investigation. And again, we can see that same growth and depth in the example on the bottom. The children actually took it so far as to ask if they could do some cloudy and sunny thinking. And so we can really see that in the middle there, and they really got creative with it. Saying things like, "I understand half," or "I kind of understand." And so we really appreciated that vulnerability from the children because it really helped us make sense of where they're at, what they're doing, and their own creative ideas and how it can come together. We can also see the educators involved in the gallery walk as a part of the community. So as equal members of the community, not as holding that knowledge, but as contributors to sharing within that gallery walk opportunity. And so we can see that Mrs. D has said, "I like how you used a chart to organize your thinking." So really going back to the math goals of organized and efficient, and really just highlighting that. And we can see that some of the children also agreed, "I like how you did this," and showed that chart. So this here, I'm not going to go in depth into day 3, but this here is an overview of that flow and how it can really be responsive to the children based off of their needs and what is emerging for them throughout their experience with the math workshop, and how we can really embed both the competency focus as well as the content to create that responsive structure. And so on day 1, our workshop looked more traditional, like a mini lesson, an investigation, and a sharing. On day 2, we had our mini lesson, our investigation, another mini lesson where we really got clear about what that sharing time might look like. And from there, we did our gallery walk, and that's where we saw that depth of thinking increase. And then on day 3, we introduced a game to engage in some purposeful practice. And while we had planned for a sharing time throughout the game, the children were having so much fun with the game. They were so engaged that we really just ended up stretching that investigation time to let them dig deeply into that game, recognizing that they needed that moment of purposeful practice with one another to explore what they'd been learning the last 2 days. And so that is the sort of wrap up of the overview and structure of Math Workshop and what it can look like in action. We explored together how communities of learners come together and they support one another, how they really work to bring their own funds of knowledge to co-construct their norms, and really engage as that community together. We saw examples of how the competencies can be, how the content can be addressed through those competencies and problem solving with one another, and how the children were actively learning and constructing their own knowledge. And what's most true to my heart for Math Workshop is the inclusion of all learners. So recognizing that by really embedding the components of Math Workshop all together, we can really honor the strengths that the children bring and the diversity of strengths. Some children might be really organized in their thinking, and it might not be efficient, but we can honor that component. Some children might have excellent perseverance, and we can really lean on them during those competency-based discussions and help highlight some of the strategies they're using. Some children might have really efficient ways of thinking about the math and the content component, and we can really bring that forward to the community. So using Math Workshop structure, we can really deeply honor, recognize, and highlight all of the multitude of strengths that the children bring as mathematicians to that community. To sum up our journey on Math Workshop, I want to recognize that Van de Waal reminds us to foster a culture of inquiry in the classroom. Teachers must be comfortable with uncertainty, ask key questions, be able to respond to students, probe thinking, prompt students to reflect on their thinking, and know the difference between productive and unproductive struggle. And so just honoring that it can be a little bit uncertain in that moment. There are a lot of things for us as educators to consider when we are thinking and engaging with math in this particular way, and recognizing that there isn't one particular answer or one way to approach it, but honoring all of the different strengths that come in, as well as our own strengths and our own comfort with that uncertainty that can emerge from a experience such as this. And so I'll give you a moment to maybe just pop some ideas in the chat. What is one idea you want to bring forward to your community of learners? So something that you might want to try or think more deeply about with your community that you are currently engaging with. Yeah, competencies. I love that. We do sometimes forget that the students need to be taught and retaught those repeated experiences. That comes from a wise soul, Leyton, always reminding us of the importance of that. Really repeating those experiences helps us deepen our understanding.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Kendra. That was amazing. I would like to introduce Nikki Lineham. Nikki's a teacher, math education consultant, PhD candidate, co-founder of Educating Now, and she hates it when she's introduced. She's passionate about making math accessible for all people. I appreciate Nikki's leadership and friendship and her deep commitment to decolonizing practice and really understanding and inspiring and inviting people to consider their learning in a different way. And Nikki is, for the champion I am of literacy, Nikki is my numeracy partner in crime, and just so grateful to be on this journey with you, Nikki, and thankful that you could be here today with us. So we will let you share your deck, and I will turn it over to you. And thanks again, Kendra. That was wonderful.
Thank you for that intro, Tammy, and thank you, Kendra. I just love how our ideas are so enmeshed. It's Squeechel. Aikwinis Kwinana CM, Asa Nikki Lineham. Good day. It's good to see you, honorable ones. I'm zooming into you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples and Saanich nations. And like Kendra, I started my day. I've got a 4.5-month-old puppy. So I start every day with, it's a walk, but it's envision trying to walk a squirrel, which is what it feels like most of the time. But the weather is beautiful and I will enjoy the puppiness while it's here. All right, I am going to jump right in. And Kendra already demonstrated so much of these characteristics. So it's such a beautiful segue. So just to be clear, these characteristics, this has come out of my PhD studies, and a lot of the folks that have written about culturally responsive teaching are based in the US, and I have found the bulk of the research has been done on Black and Latinx students. So as I go through these kind of characteristics that have been brought forth in the last few decades, I invite you to think about how we can incorporate First Peoples principles of learning. Some are already in here, but just to think about that. So our first one is believing all students are capable of success. And I think especially with mathematics, we tend to have a very narrow view of success. So it's about broadening that view into what can success look like in a myriad of ways for our students. Cultivating that connectedness and respectful relationships with all students. And that's, to me, that relational learning as well. And then this, to me, is the heart of culturally responsive teaching, is really developing that collaboration so that learners are responsible for their own learning, but also the learning of their classmates. And that tends to build a really beautiful, safe environment. And I'm going to speak to ways in which I do that. Kendra already spoke to a lot of brilliant ways that she's doing that. So you'll leave here today filled to the brim with ideas. The belief that knowledge is not static. It is shared, constructed, and recycled. And again, for math, this one, kind of sometimes people really question that. So if it's a sticking point, I just invite you to be curious about it. Centering student voices, their cultures, their lived experiences, and knowing that they all come with strengths and knowledge. And sometimes those strengths and knowledge, as Kendra alluded to, aren't necessarily academic. That doesn't mean that they're not very important and that we can acknowledge and hold up. And this is the last one. This is the one I'm going to spend most of my time talking about today. And I chose this because in my work with teachers, this one makes folks pretty nervous because they're not really sure, like, how do I critique social and environmental inequities in math? And the fear often comes from not wanting to be accused of indoctrinating children. We live in a political sphere. So that's what I'm going to speak about that today and in some different ways. And as my Hawaiian kumu, my Hawaiian teachers say, we talk story. So I'm going to talk story a little bit with you. I invite you at this point, what else might you add to this that you would consider culturally responsive teaching? And you can pop some ideas into the chat or just ponder. I'm going to keep moving along. Okay. It would if it worked. There we go. So the first piece I wanted to talk about is the collaborative learning groups. Kendra really highlighted some beautiful ways of structured partner talk and working together. I love this mode. It's called complex instruction. It's a terrible name because it makes it sound really hard to do. It's not. And if you're familiar with Jo Boaler's work, this is the pedagogy that she uses. So within complex instruction, in that little book up that you see in the top right corner, it's called Designing Group Work, and that lays it out how you go about doing that, and you can get a PDF of that. So this whole pedagogy was deliberately designed as an equity pedagogy, and it explicitly addresses what they term as status issues. So those are things where, and I hear this all the time, unfortunately, in mostly the middle years, but also with adults, is kids that say, I can't do math, I'm bad at math, like I can't, I'm not gonna be able to help in the group because like this is not what I'm good at. And children generally tend to do that with one another, like he's the good athlete, she's the fastest reader, etc. And I really appreciate how they support us as the educators in the room trying to address these issues in a good way. Within this structure, every student has a role and a responsibility. So things like, I call it the organizer, you're sort of making sure that the task or the problem's been read through, that people understand. There's the recorder reporter, the resource facilitator. And what I love about these roles is that in group work, we often see, I call them the bossy pants, the kids that just take over the learning for the whole group. And then you have the ones that are deliberately bowing out and happy to not do anything at all. So with this structure, everyone has a role. So there is no bowing out, and they actually hold themselves responsible because they're like, hey, you're the recorder reporter, we need you to do your role. And normally what I do with this, and the example I'm going to share with you today, I didn't because I sort of popped into a classroom. But just as Kendra had shared, we co-create criteria for working collaboratively. I usually start with little sticky notes where we write like what I need when I work within a group, what I don't like or what I don't want to have happen working within a group. And then we slowly build that over time. Some children don't know. They don't know what to say in that, but after they start working in groups, they learn quite quickly. These are the things that work for me. These are the things that don't. And then I put that on a big chart paper and it lives in the classroom. And then inevitably throughout the year when group work is not going as well as it could, we go back to the criteria that all came from them and revisit what we had discussed and see if we need to change it or if we're going to get back on track. And then when I'm getting these groups used to it, they're not naturally great at collaborating all the time. Some groups are, some groups aren't. The other thing I really like about that book is it has specific tasks that help to students learn how to do things like explain clearly, listen for understanding, taking care of others. So it helps you to coach them to develop those skills. And then what I do is I listen. So I'll start, I'll say freeze, few minutes in, and I'll give shout outs to the groups that are collaborating well. So I'll say things like, look at how this group is sitting, where all of them are actually looking at the task. So I can see they're all actively engaged. I always listen for someone who's brave enough to say, I don't get it. And then I'll say, shout out to this group. Someone was brave enough to be vulnerable, have the courage to say, I don't get it. So the rest of them can practice how they would explain it and show their thinking. So that way we're highlighting what good collaboration looks like, sounds like, and feels like, which gives them the exemplars to keep moving forward. And then, like I said, explicitly teaching those skills is sometimes necessary. I don't always have to do it. The bonus is the tasks that book provides are all a bit mathematical. And I think that's just by fluke because this isn't necessarily designed for math. Oh, one more thing. Within this, I know a lot of folks are using Peter Lildahl's work around thinking classrooms. I also utilize a lot of those pieces. I just found for a lot of the middle school kids that the visibly random grouping spiked anxiety, and some kids would just disappear. Like they'd just come in the room and then they'd be like hiding in the bathroom. So I find with this roles and sticking in the same group for a while, they learn to really build beautiful connections and learning groups. So in this one, I forgot to explain the pictures in the last one, but we'll jump in. A lot of this comes from my ethno-math work. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing with that around social and eco-justice. The collaborative learning is the pedagogy that we use, so I didn't want to skip over that. But I also just had the honor of teaching the math methods course at UVic in the Indigenous Education Department, and we borrowed and shifted a little bit a project from other professors. And what we invited our students to do, and this is work that I've done with ethnomath, is to create a unit of study in which mathematics and science, social studies, whatever, concepts reveal critical social and/or ecological issues. So the idea is exploring some of these ideas through a mathematical lens. So what these pictures represent, 2 years ago in our ethnomath work, we brought some students, multi-age group, grade 8 to 12 students from Alaska, Angoon, Alaska, to Hawaii. And these pictures are on the Big Island in Hilo at the Kamehameha School. And so the Kamehameha School had a beautiful multi-grade integrated curricular increase. That's the example I wanted to share. So The students were learning about canoe plants. So those are the plants that their ancestors used for food. And at the point that we were there in Hawaii, over 90% of their food is actually imported, and they have some major issues with food insecurity. However, one of their canoe plants, breadfruit, one tree can feed 50 people for a year. So they're exploring these ideas. So in their English language arts, they were creating stories. They were learning the elements of story writing with a canoe plant as their main character. And then as part of their physical and health education, they were outdoors working with a gardener where they were actually growing some of the canoe plants. In this case, we're preparing the land to plant sweet potatoes. They actually harvest the vegetables and fruit that they grow, and their foods teacher has them cooking different things with it. And then in math, they're exploring, and science, really, they combine to explore like the different statistics. Like I gave you that stat about how many people could be fed, how much land it would take to grow these, and other sustainability factors. So it was this beautiful example of how all of the subject areas that we would call them were integrated to study canoe plants on whole. They also looked at the history, why they're called canoe plants, where they originated from, etc. So on the top right photo there, that's some of our students, and we were doing service learning. So part of ethnomathematics is we learn on and from the land, and then we give back to the land with service learning. So in this case, we're harvesting taro. So we got knee deep, some of us, into this very mucky, sludgy water, and sometimes little things would touch your legs, but we were brave and did it anyways. And we harvested enough taro that was going to feed a community for dinner in 2 days' time. So that felt really good for us to give back to these folks who were hosting us so beautifully. And then the Alaska students also brought with them some of their traditional foods. You can see that in the bottom left. They had cockles, some smoked salmon, and jam. And what we did with our students was a whole bunch of math around food sovereignty in their location. They also have a hydroponics class, so we were able to tie in with that teacher and really explore some of those issues. When I gave this project to my students, they worked in groups and they were studying, they just created these most beautiful units, some of which weren't a traditional unit that happened like beginning and end in like a certain time, but they were spread out over the year, looking at things like food waste and sustainability, calendars and seasons, and like marking seasons in different ways from the Gregorian calendar, as well as uplifting music of Indigenous and Black Canadians, and creating our own music and participating in Ska Fest. So some really cool ideas that came out of that. So I was inspired by them, and also thinking, I love sharing all my ethnomath with you all, but I also understand that the context can feel very overwhelming. Folks are busy. So I did what I call a toe dip. So I put out some feelers to some of my teacher friends and colleagues. Leyton has a word, frolics, is that your word? Anyways, and I said, can I just come in and play math with your students? So I was invited into a grade 8 class, and what I asked was for the teacher before I came, what social or eco-justice issues would your students want to learn about? I listed a few examples, but I said anything, like what are their interests? So I started with listening to student voice and choice, and they chose carbon tax, which actually shocked the teacher. I didn't know anything about carbon tax, so I had to do some learning. And so I came into this class, just to give you the context, they were 40-minute long blocks, but they were the first block of the day, and the announcements went quite long. I would say I had maybe 30 minutes. So this is what we managed to accomplish in our 2 little short blocks, and then we'll think about what we could have done further. But I just want to lay it out for you, the process, so that if you want to try something similar or the same thing, go for it. So we were focusing on that authentic problem solving, and because they were in grade 8 and had just been studying percentages before spring break, I focused quite a bit of the data on percent, but you don't have to. There's lots of information about something like carbon tax in graphs, using rates, ratios, all sorts of other ideas. So if you're teaching in that multi-grade, you could explore it using a variety of mathematical content. The competencies that we engaged were many. I'm not going to list them all. But when we delve into something like this, you inevitably are using many of those competencies. And to me, I think of those as the vehicle. So again, we could look at this using a variety of different ways. You'll see a few of them here. And my question to you, and I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat, if you were thinking about doing some learning around carbon tax, and I think this must have come up because it was in the news and maybe they had heard it at home, but I don't know why they chose it. It's just what they chose. What other curricular areas do you anticipate connecting with an exploration on carbon tax? So I was just focusing mostly on the numeracy, but inevitably I had to pull in some history and some other pieces. But when I looked through the curriculum in more detail, I realized we could connect it quite easily to social studies. I'm checking out our chat too. Yeah, exactly. Environmental science, social studies, we have the same ideas. Also, if we were going to do some writing, we already were doing some reading and they had to justify, but maybe they felt compelled to do some writing about it. There's the aspects of health education, and then you could even look at applied design skills and technologies. My point is we can get creative. Our curriculum allows us so much room for exploration. Okay, I don't know why one side's up and not the other, but here we go. So this is essentially, whoops, how we started. I asked them, what do you already know about carbon tax? And basically it was crickets. I had them write it down. Most of them says, I don't know anything. One boy said, carbon is in trees. And I was like, great, we know something here. Then I put them into their groups. These students had never been working in the complex instruction, so they didn't know about the roles. So I did a real fast version with them. They actually worked beautifully from day one in their groups, which was lucky. That doesn't always happen. And so once they were in their groups, their first task was to read this statement, which is a complex statement that BC Carbon's tax puts a price on carbon pollution, yada, yada, yada. And I said, put that into everyday English. Like, how would you explain that to someone much younger than you? And then also ask them, what questions do you have? Like, just checking in if they understand. They were able to say, we're trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but also keep the economy strong. And then, try to put money into low carbon, innovations. So they got that point. Then we looked at this next bit of data. And I will tell you, when I started looking for information, I was finding all sorts of different numbers. And at first I was like, oh no, because I was thinking about the classic math textbook where, it's very clearly laid out. But then I thought this is actually perfect because this is real life. And we ended up having a very rich discussion about why the data was not all the same. So it's okay that if you can't find things that all match perfectly. So because they have been studying percentage increase, I asked them, what's it going up? It's went from $65 to $80 per ton of CO2 emissions. And it just so happened that they all approached it in a different way. So I didn't start with a mini lesson because we were curious to see what they had retained about their percentages. And just a note from the teacher there in blue, she said there was one student who she has never heard talk in math class and knew that she was extending based on what she had written in the math she had done, but had no idea how this child's brain worked until this. So she was thrilled to be able to hear that. And another student was one who often would put her head down every math class. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this behavior. And the only time she would lift her head is if an adult kind of came and, coaxed her to do so. And this girl they were in their groups, they started doing the work, and she put her head down, and her group members were like, hey, you gotta pay attention. You're the reporter. Like, we're gonna need you soon. So you have to join in it. Like, we all are doing this together. So it sort of utilizes, I say peer pressure, but in a good way, not in the negative way. So these are the snippets of work that the students did. So in the top left here, I thought it was interesting. This group just started doing their benchmarks for percents. So they were doing that. They did it for $80. They did it for $65. And then they got stumped. And they went around in circles. They went down the wrong way. And this is where, as Kendra was talking about, that time, giving them time to make mistakes, to take a path that might not be the right path or just might not be useful. It's nothing they did here was incorrect. It just didn't help them to solve it. And they did ask for some support. So we used a hundreds grid, and we tried to show them that we were talking about the percentage change and then reminding them that, it's the change of the original amount. So that's where they ended up getting to with their 23%. The group below on the left did the same strategy, but they came to it organically. The one on the top right, the question on top, she wrote, what percent of 65 is 15? And then she said to me, like, how do I do that? And I said, well, how do you think you do it? And I said, you've got the right question. And she said, but percents out of 100. And I said, yes. And so that was what she did. And at first I couldn't follow her thinking. I was like, why are we doing 130? But if you look at it, I think you'll see what she did. They did really, but her group was a little more reluctant. The one in the middle that you probably can't read, they erased it all before I could stop them. So what they did was, this group of it was 4 boys, they were using a calculator, and 2 of them had a calculator and 2 of them were inputting. And what they were doing was they were trying to figure out, they were doing trial and error. So they were doing, what percentage of 65 would I then add to 65 to get as close to 80 as I could? And they still got to the correct answer, but they did it using that approach. And then that last one, it took me a while to follow this thinking as well. But what they did was they figured out, they knew 1% of 65 was 6500s. So they figured out how many groups of 6500s it took to make $15. So proud teacher moment there. She was happy that they all were able to access. And even though some students were frustrated, they were like, man, we learned this a few weeks ago and I can't remember. They had retained enough and understood percent conceptually enough to be able to approach and solve the problem. So then we said, okay, so what? We've got this big increase. We did talk about how big 23% increase is in terms of value. And then we said, let's do some dollar and cents math here. So we looked at the gas increase that we would have per liter. And then we explored different size vehicles. We explored a small car, a hybrid SUV, a truck. We looked around the room. We did like whose family has what type of vehicle. So we kind of had a sense of what this might cost our families. And then they did those calculations and some found them quite surprising. And we discussed like, what else might increase? So then they did some more group discussion and they came up with things like delivery services, things like Skip the Dishes and DoorDash. Those might increase because the people are driving. And then they got into like food, like delivering food from the port to the grocery store, or from farms to the grocery store. So they were understanding that this is more widespread than simply filling up their own vehicle. So then we got into this other data, and this is what I was saying. I was like, oh man, I'm getting all these different numbers. So I just presented the numbers to them. And we looked at this, we looked at the goal. So BC, first of all, I did not know that BC had its own carbon tax in 2008. And there's tons of data on it because it was one of the first in North America to do so. So it's not part of the federal carbon tax. So that was my own little learning journey. But then we explored these different sets of data. We talked about like, at this rate, would we be able to get to the goal of being below 40% below 2007 levels in 2030 and net zero by 2050? And sometimes the information I gave, there wasn't enough to be able to solve that question. So they had to unearth that and say that. So they did a really great job. I was super impressed with the depth of their thinking and in such a short period of time. We did another percentage decrease here where we actually captured the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from like before 2008 and then 2020. And then again, looked at some of the stats were about the use of fuels. And oops, before I get there. So at the end of this, the big question, the transforming question was, is carbon tax effective? And I said, there's no right or wrong answer. You can say whatever you want as long as you back it up and justify. And you use mathematics any which way to justify. And each of the groups did say that it was effective, and they based it on, some of them pulled out different points of the data, but they all agreed that it was effective. And then I showed them this, which was in the news a few days prior, where they had polled Canadians, just over 1,000 Canadians, and 61% of these who were polled didn't think it was effective. They said it was ineffective. So then I said, well, what's going on here? How is that possible? You all thought it was effective. Why wouldn't these folks? So we engaged in more discussion, and they came to the conclusion that it was adults who were surveyed, and the adults were mad because things were going to cost more money for them. So they just said it was ineffective based on their emotion rather than based on the data. But again, this graph could have been presented in a different way. I did notice this was past when I was there, and I was away up in Nisga'a afterwards, but I noticed there was another article where Jane Goodall was saying she doesn't like carbon tax, and it's not because it's not effective, but it's not enough, and she thinks there's other ways that would be more effective. So if I was continuing with this class, I would have pulled that in, and we could have had a debate with Jane, because I think that would have been pretty cool. So the students reflected that they thought it was good to learn about something important for the environment in math. They actually really liked that. Some of them in their reflection said, I learned what carbon tax even is. They learned that it was good for the world. And the teacher said in her conversations that they really liked getting to prove that it works, even when many people think it doesn't. So I think they got a little one up on the adults there. So my question would be, what next? If I was going to continue this, that, like I said, that was a toe dip. And it was great. We got a lot done. We utilized math, we explored a subject, but we did it in just the most surface level. These are just 5 examples of graphs and data that I found very easily, quickly on the internet. So depending on the students and where they wanted to go would depend on where I would want to go. So maybe they want to look at Canada's emissions compared to the whole world. Maybe they want to explore BC compared to the rest of Canada. There's a myriad of options here, but the idea would be following there. And also what I might do with this is different groups could take different pieces and run with it. So if one group really wanted to explore like the BC emissions or carbon tax in different parts of the world, they could go off and do that. If some students wanted to compare BC to the rest of Canada, they could do that, and then we could come back for a sharing. So all sorts of options here for the students to run with this. And so my question to you, that you are welcome to unmute and share or pop in the chat, is if you were to toe dip into a social or an eco-justice issue, what might you explore? And you can just list some ideas that you might give to your students. I will say, just saying to them, what social justice or eco-justice issues do you want to explore, might not give you a lot of results because they might not know what it means. So what examples might you use? And these could be things that you've heard your students talk about, or that you think are meaningful for the place where you currently teach, where your students live. Could be something around fires if you're in that part of BC where that's already becoming an issue. And yeah, I'm just curious as to where you would go next. I will share with you that my next step for my numeracy task work is with the new device restrictions that are coming out. In BC, we know that we're going to have some pretty unhappy high school students who maybe are used to having devices in their pockets. So I'm going to start on my own, but then hopefully working with some students in Nisga'a, and I'm going to create some numeracy tasks around the data that we now know about the health risks using that book, Anxious Generation, which has gathered the data. So that's my goal, is to then have this numeracy so the students get to engage and see for themselves why the government is making this rule. Same thing with the carbon tax. I think people are opposed to the imposition of things, but if they understand the reasoning behind, they might have a shift. So I just want to check out the chat because I'm seeing lots of folks here. Yeah, plastic. Thank you. Yes, the logging close to a reservoir. See, there's so many good topics. So I'm hoping that this helped you understand that you can come at it not from your belief system, but from like we're looking at the math, and data science is, I think, the most important of numeracy. And it's, I don't know why that's not the required university and upper level high school course, but maybe one day change the world. Yeah, endangered species, fish numbers. Yeah, someone wrote that. Yeah, cell phone use, mental health. All right, well, thanks, folks. I just want to keep reading.
Nikki, amazing. Thank you so much. I love learning alongside you. So many fantastic examples. And I love the ideas in the chat too. It's making me think about all kinds of different things. We looked at elk populations one time, and we were looking at different things. Should wolves be eradicated was a topic we did one time when they were killing caribou. There's so many different things. Thank you. Leyton, over to you.
Thanks, Nikki. I really appreciated the moving from students' interests and what they're interested in. Sometimes it's not what I'm interested in. And so I think there's a nice combination of like, what's a local issue or something, but sometimes it's also, I have to say, sports stats have been a successful teaching tool for me for over 30 years, where like, if that's what kids want to talk about. And so we can I think we can also extend those questions to like, and then what's an issue related to that sport? What's another thing that's happening? So I think we're all super interested in ethnomathematics. Every time you mention it, I see people's eyes perk up. Kendra, I thought that you gave us an inclusion context, and then Nikki, you blew it open. And so, you know, while we maybe didn't call this series the inclusion series, at the heart of middle school philosophy and practice is the idea that all kids are welcome and that we need to see them as contributing members of the classroom and growing from where they're at. So these open-ended tasks, these open-ended problems are really exciting. Nikki, I don't know if you just wanted to, or Kendra want to talk at all about visuals. There's a lot of visuals in what you're offering. I don't know where that fits in terms of this practice as a provocation or a support or a jumping off point.
Yeah, so I'll jump in first, Kendra, and then you can jump in. I provided them with hundreds grids for that, but visuals to me, and thank you, Leyton, for the question, are a key piece. Like when we talk about student-centered, and I know I read the stat once that 5 parts of our brain light up every time we do math, and 3 of those are visual. So if we do the math on that, that's more than half, that's 60%. Is visual. So I think about how the way math was historically taught with just abstract kind of bare naked numbers and symbols, and why we have such an innumerate adult population and so many folks who are really quite honestly scared of math, including the parents of the current children we're teaching. So visuals are the key to that. Every time I do family math nights and parent math nights, that's what we do. We bring forward the manipulatives to look at things even like decimals and fractions and percents. And every single time the parents are like, man, why didn't we get this when we were taught math? So those are crucial. And I would say like they're necessary, and the more hands-on, the better. I know there's classroom management can be with those, but it's also a routine and a piece of learning math that students can handle. Like I worked in the district behavior program and I used manipulatives every day, and they were actually, the behaviors go down because the students are engaged. That's the other piece people don't realize, is those popping up behaviors just go whoop once they get the hands-on and they can see what other folks are doing. Kendra, I'd love to hear your thoughts on visuals.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of manipulatives. And I think you covered that, so I'll cover a different perspective. For me, when I think about that math workshop structure, I like to think of the mini lesson time as the time when I'm creating visuals for thinking. So I'm actually helping the children, modeling different ways they might represent their own visuals later, but I'm not inviting children during that mini lesson time to actually come up and do the visuals. I'm giving them sort of new ideas and different ideas because math historically hasn't been that visual. Sometimes they're not sure how to even make it visual. And so there's lots of different things to consider there, but I like to think of the mini lesson time as visuals or models for thinking. And then during that investigation time is when the children get to really play with it. And I want to really share that sometimes it can take the children weeks before they start using the visuals that have been happening in the mini lesson. They're not comfortable with them yet. They might be thinking about them in their head, but there's that representational lag where, you know, weeks later, that ratio example table that I shared, we had been looking at ratio tables and how they could help us visualize our thinking months ago. And it was maybe the first time that the children had actually kind of brought that forward and were playing with it on their own. So just really honoring that there's opportunities for us to model those visuals, and we want to be intentional with that. And we also want to be intentional with providing children opportunities to share their own visuals, because they will come up with some brilliant representations that we hadn't even thought of as well. And so it's always balancing that, thinking, what's my intention here with that visual representation, and how will I honor it and celebrate it in many different ways?
Yeah, and coming back to like the using the graphs, like I could give a bunch of numbers. It went from this to that, this percentage, and for some kids, that's just nothing's going, you know, they're not making sense of it. But you show a graph that goes like this or that goes like this, and they're like, oh, it's going up, it's going down, which is the big concept. And then we can get into the nitty gritty. And just coming back, one of my favorite ethnomath themes that we did. So we taught it was again multi-grade, so it was grade 8 to 12 students. We did a whole unit around parabolas, and we used basketball because literally in the school, basketball is life. It is like every single child plays. It's really the only sport that they have access to. It's a tiny little community of 300 people on the island, but they have inter-tournaments with other villages in Alaska. So we had them actually go to the gym. They were shooting hoops, they were filming one another, and then they were transposing the pictures onto Desmos to then graph them. And then they looked at people who they admire, like Steph Curry. I know nothing about sports. I only learned it from them. This is relational learning. And so then they looked at Steph Curry, and they learned that like it's the way, like the trajectory of his free throws is what makes him so successful. So then they got to go back to the gym and so the whole, it was math, but it was all the things combined. And these were, again, students that historically had been pretty underserved, and we were told they're not going to be able to do quadratic equations. And we were like, well, we proved them wrong. Students all understood.
Folks, I really appreciated the open-endedness in the practices that you shared today. And so I know my colleague Lanny Konevsky used to say a low floor and a high ceiling. And so I really saw ways in to engaging the math, but also places that you could take it. And so, you know, is it Nikki that you talked about the one student that the teacher was like, I didn't realize the incredible complexity we're thinking. I'm often surprised by the amazingness of students who, once they stand up and draw their math on a window or like, there's so much there, but sitting in the desk is kind of just shuts you down. But standing and sharing a pen at the window is really powerful. So I don't know if you have some favorite places that you go to for open-ended tasks, you two.
I really like Peter Lildahall's numeracy tasks, and those were co-created with teachers. And just be mindful of the grade bands, because there's a cupcake task in there that's in the K to 3 band, and I use it K to adults. I had a physics 11 teacher tell me that it's what she, in Maple Ridge, it's what she uses on her first day of physics every day. Or every year as a way to get them started. I used it with my university students on the first day, and I just did it up in Nishka with a grade 2-3 class. They all approach it completely differently, but they're all thinking mathematically and communicating. So those tasks are really good. U Cubed has really great open tasks as well. And then those are the freebies, and then there's print resource, like Kathy Fosno's work is all great. Marion Small has like open questions for rich, you know, math discussions. Kendra, what's coming to your mind?
You covered all of my top ones. Those would be, yeah, actually, those would be my top four. I don't know if there's anything in particular I would add to that. There, yeah, I'd say those would be my go-to. I do lean on Kathy Fosno's work a lot, and I often will use the math numbers that she pulls because she pulls them very intentionally, and then I just change the context. So she has one, for example, I can't even think of the original context because we changed it all about gardening to match our school gardens, and I cannot for the life of me think of that original context. Oh, Muffles Truffles is the original context. So it's about chocolate and truffles. And so we just talked about planting of the plants in the garden. And so I really appreciate the intentionality of numbers within her resources, but then we'll make the context suit our local space and the interests of the children. Yeah,
How
I see
about-
some you've added
How about,
to the
how
chat.
about, I love 3-act math. I know it's not
Yes.
quite exactly what's here, but I just love, because they've got those little videos. It's like you got the ladder and the situation, and then I just get right into it.
Yeah, 3-act tasks are great, and open middle someone wrote. Those are decontextualized, but they're great for getting into like the depth of knowledge, like the conceptual understanding, and they often are very incentivizing for students. And they're doing all the practice we want them to do, but for the purpose of like solving the actual task.
There's also one called Visual Maths. And so they have the same idea, the videos, and they show those visuals sort of changing over time, and they leave you with an open-ended inquiry. Those are excellent as well. And can anyone remember, maybe it's in the chat already, there's the slow reveal graphs. I can't remember the website. Maybe it's even slow reveal graphs, but slow reveal graphs, that idea is also very visual and engaging for the children.
Sandra, do you know that one? What's it called? Do you know what it's called?
I think it is slow reveal graphs. Isn't that the one that comes through the New York Times? Let me look.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great free, ready to use resources for a myriad of different things in the classroom, like all of Steve Wyburny stuff, the Splat and SD Mysteries, and then, when we're talking about middle years, I want to have students asking the questions. Like they're at an age where they can become problem posers instead of always just problem solvers. Mm-hmm. So that was like, again, with asking them what mattered to them or what they wanted to explore was the first step in that. And then in an ideal, and like, I think the way Kendra modeled it, like, how do we explicitly teach them to ask those mathematical questions, knowing that there also might not be an answer, or there might not be like one answer, there might be many. And then that's really cool, because just like we did with the kids, like, I'm like, why are there so many different numbers? And they said, well, the population increased and this changed and that changed. And we talked about how statisticians and people who do that work have to factor in all of that. And that's math beyond me, that's for sure. But there's a lot to it that they can really wrap their brains around.
I'll add one more piece to that. We often will talk about how once you're done, you've only just begun, and we co-create that anchor chart. And so one of the options when we are going through investigations is, what questions can I ask about this, or what questions can I create? Cool. So really creating that structure for the children, that once you're done, you've only just begun. Okay, what do? We think about our thinking. Does it make sense to our audience? Is there anything we need to add or change? But we also can create new questions for our audience of mathematicians. And so sometimes the kids will actually just start writing new questions on their investigation papers or on the whiteboards or wherever they're working, they will just add their own wonders when we create that structure of flow.
Well, huge thanks to Nikki and Kendra. How lovely. It was only the math webinar where people actually stayed on time, and we had 10 minutes for follow-up discussion. So kudos to y'all.
Fast talkers.
and planners. Everyone, thanks for participating in the series again this year. Of course, share the work. It should be available on the Edith Loud webinar or website. in about 2 weeks. And so we know, looking at the stats, that people continue to watch them and share them with colleagues. And so, you know, we want these to be practices that we're sharing in a community that's not just on the webinar day, but beyond. And Tammy, thank you for spearheading this work and supporting us in continuing to push. Even once you left the ministry, you're like, we have to keep doing this. And it's been really, really special to do together.
Well, thanks to you for championing the work, and folks for being there and being in it. I just am so excited, and I think I just want to close with that piece that I appreciate so much from both of you around the inclusive piece that Leyton talked about, that all students are encouraged and that students are supporting each other in their learning, and that co-creating learning and the authentic way that you're in the learning alongside them. I think that's what we want to see in everything we do. But we know that for students with numeracy and not experiencing success, we want to shift it so that the parents of the next generation are open and excited about math and not fearful and giving their kids permission to not do well at it. We want to change that narrative in our province.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming. No, it's a long day.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Thank you.